The quiet, conditioned air of the first-class cabin is a sacred space. It's a world of warm towels, pre-flight champagne, and the hushed tones of people who believe they've earned a buffer from the chaos of the world. For 17-year-old Jamal Hayes, seat one away on Aura Airlines Flight 815 from JFK to London, was more than just a comfortable chair. It was a window to his future, a front-row seat to the marvel of aeronautical engineering he planned to dedicate his life to. He was comfortable, lost in a schematic on his tablet, but he didn't know that his ticket, bought and paid for, was about to be challenged by a currency he didn't possess. The venomous entitlement of the woman in seat 2B. Her name was Caroline Sterling, and in 5 minutes her assumptions would ignite a firestorm that would not only halt a 400-ton Boeing 777 in its tracks, but also send shockwaves from the tarmac all the way to the boardroom. The first-class cabin of Aura Airlines was designed to be an oasis of tranquility. The color palette was a soothing blend of cream and slate gray. The lighting was soft and indirect, and the gentle hum of the auxiliary power unit was a lullaby promising a smooth journey across the Atlantic. For Jamal Hayes, it was perfect. He had his noise-canceling headphones on, not playing music, but simply to mute the ambient chatter and focus on the complex jet engine diagrams displayed on his tablet. He wore a simple gray hoodie from his high school's robotics club, dark jeans, and a pair of well-worn Nikes. He looked like any other teenager, albeit one with a preternatural ability to focus. His boarding pass, clearly printed with Hayes Jamal, Seat 1A, lay on the small table next to his untouched glass of sparkling water. He had boarded early, eager to settle in and watch the ground crew's intricate ballet of loading and refueling. To him, an airport wasn't just a place of transit. It was a living cathedral of modern engineering. The serene atmosphere was punctured by the sharp, staccato clicks of high heels on the cabin floor. Caroline Sterling had arrived, dressed in a tailored white pantsuit that screamed wealth and disdain for airplane spills. With a Hermes Birkin bag clutched in her hand like a weapon, she surveyed the cabin. Her eyes, narrowed and critical, swept past the businessman in 3A and the elderly couple in 4D, before landing and sticking on Jamal. She stopped dead in the aisle, her lips curling into a subtle sneer. She glanced at her own boarding pass, then back at Jamal, then at the empty seat next to him, 1B. An ugly thought, born of prejudice and nurtured by a lifetime of privilege, took root in her mind and blossomed instantly into conviction. This young black man, in his casual clothes, couldn't possibly belong here. He must be lost, or worse. Instead of speaking to him, she signaled a flight attendant with an imperious snap of her fingers. Brenda Walsh, a senior flight attendant, with tired eyes and a practiced, weary smile, hurried over. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" "Yes," Caroline said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper, but loud enough for Jamal to hear over the hum. She didn't look at Jamal, instead gesturing towards him with a flick of her chin. "I think there's been a mistake. I believe this gentleman is in the wrong cabin. Perhaps he's confused." Brenda's eyes flicked to Jamal, who had now removed his headphones, his brow furrowed in confusion. Brenda saw a teenager in a hoodie. She saw Caroline Sterling, dripping in designer labels and exuding an aura of someone who wrote letters to corporate. She made a quick and disastrous calculation. "Sir?" Brenda's tone was immediately different from the one she used with Caroline. It was firm, edged with impatience. "May I see your boarding pass?" Jamal, though taken aback, complied politely. He handed her the pass. Brenda glanced at it, her professional smile faltering for a fraction of a second. It clearly said 1A. She looked back at Caroline, expecting her to be satisfied. She wasn't. "That's impossible," Caroline declared, her voice rising. "He can't be in this seat. My husband and I are longtime Aura Celestial members. We know the kind of clientele that flies in this cabin. This is absurd." The implication was thick and poisonous. Clientele was code. People like us. Jamal felt a familiar, cold pit forming in his stomach. He'd felt it before, being followed in stores, being stopped by security at the mall, but never here, not in a place he had every right to be. "Ma'am, the pass says 1A, Brenda said, now flustered, caught between the evidence in her hand and the unyielding pressure from the woman in white. "Then it's a fake," Caroline snapped. Or he stole it. Are you going to do something about this, or do I need to speak to the captain? I am not going to sit here for 8 hours feeling unsafe. The word unsafe was the trigger. In a post-9/11 world, it was a loaded weapon. Brenda's training, her instinct for de-escalation, evaporated. The path of least resistance was to appease the loud, wealthy, and threatening passenger. Sir, Brenda said, turning back to Jamal, her voice now stripped of all pleasantries. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things. We need to verify this ticket at the gate. Jamal's jaw tightened. Verify it? You're holding it. It's real. My name is Jamal Hayes. That's my seat. You can look it up in your system. He was calm, his voice steady, but inside a quiet rage was simmering. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush creeping up his neck. Please don't make this difficult, Brenda insisted, her hand gesturing for him to get up. It wasn't difficult until she made it difficult, Jamal said, nodding towards Caroline, who now stood with her arms crossed, a smug, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She had won. The world had been put back in its proper order. The businessman in 3A was now peering over his newspaper. The couple in 4D were whispering. The sanctuary had been violated, and Jamal was being made the source of the desecration. He knew arguing further would only make him look like the problem they already assumed he was. With a slow, deliberate motion, he picked up his tablet, tucked it into his backpack, and stood up. Every eye in the cabin was on him as he walked past Caroline Sterling, the scent of her expensive perfume feeling like an insult, and followed Brenda down the jet bridge, leaving his rightful seat behind. The jet bridge felt 100 miles long. The muffled sounds of the cabin were replaced by the whine of the engines and the chilly draft from the open door. Jamal was led back to the gate area, a public space now, where his humiliation was no longer semi-private. The gate agent, a harried-looking man named Frank, looked up as Brenda approached with Jamal in tow. We have a situation, Brenda said, keeping her voice low. A passenger in first is claiming this young man's ticket is fraudulent. She felt threatened. We need to verify his ticket and, well, figure out what to do. Frank sighed. The last thing he needed was a delay. Boarding was almost complete. He took the boarding pass from Brenda and scanned it. Beep. The screen flashed green. Hayes Jamal, seat 1A. Status, checked in, boarded. It's valid, Frank said, looking at Jamal with a hint of apology, then at Brenda with annoyance. It's a full-fare first-class ticket, confirmed and paid for. Well, the other passenger is a Celestial member, and she is making a significant scene, Brenda retorted defensively. She mentioned feeling unsafe. You know what that means. The captain will have to be informed. Jamal stood silently, listening to them discuss his fate as if he weren't there. The anger was now cementing into a cold resolve. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was being systematically disenfranchised in real time. His legitimacy stripped away by the baseless accusation of one person and the cowardly compliance of the staff. As if on cue, Captain Robert Miller appeared at the end of the jet bridge. He was a man in his late 50s with a crisp uniform and an air of absolute command, an image he had carefully cultivated over 30 years of flying. What's the holdup, Brenda? We're 5 minutes from closing the door. Brenda quickly explained the situation, framing it carefully. We have a passenger, Caroline Sterling, a top-tier frequent flyer, who is very distressed. She believes this young man doesn't belong in first class and feels threatened by his presence. His ticket scans as valid, but she is adamant. Captain Miller looked from his flustered flight attendant to Jamal. He saw a kid in a hoodie. He saw the potential for a mountain of paperwork, a formal complaint from a Celestial member, and a significant delay if this escalated further. His job, as he saw it in that moment, was to get Flight 815 to London on time. The problem had a simple, immediate solution. Son, Captain Miller said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I don't have time for this drama. I'm not going to have a distressed passenger in first for an 8-hour flight. We can put you in a premium economy seat and we'll refund you the difference. That's the best I can do. Take it or leave it, but you're not getting back on that plane into that cabin. The injustice of it was staggering. Jamal was being punished for being the victim. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was the one being offered a demotion. a token refund, as if his dignity had a price tag. "No," Jamal said, his voice quiet but firm. "That's not acceptable." "I'm not asking you, I'm telling you," the captain said, his patience gone. "We have a schedule to keep. The schedule is being delayed because you're refusing to seat a paying passenger in his assigned seat based on the lies of another passenger." Jamal countered, his words precise and clear. Captain Miller's face hardened. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like a teenager. "All right, that's it. You're off my plane. Frank, handle it." With that, the captain turned and marched back onto the plane, his decision made. Brenda shot Jamal a look that was a mixture of pity and, "I told you so," before following him. Frank, the gate agent, was left to clean up the mess. "Look, kid, I'm sorry. He's the captain. His word is final. I have to deplane you. We can book you on the next flight tomorrow morning." "You're removing me from the flight?" Jamal asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "My hands are tied," Frank said, already tapping at his keyboard, trying to process the offloading procedure. Jamal stared through the window at the massive Boeing 777, its lights blinking, ready to depart. His plane, his seat, his dream of watching the takeoff from the best seat in the house was being stolen from him. The humiliation, the anger, the sheer unfairness of it all coalesced into a single clarifying thought. They had made a mistake. They had profiled him, dismissed him, and ejected him, but they had no idea who they had just ejected. He calmly pulled out his phone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He didn't threaten. He found a familiar name in his contacts and pressed the call button. Frank glanced up from his monitor. "Who are you calling?" "Your parents. They can call the customer service line. There's nothing more I can do." "Something like that," Jamal said as the call connected. He spoke into the phone, his voice steady. "Hey, Dad. Sorry to bother you. Yeah, I'm still at JFK. There's a bit of a problem with my flight." He paused, listening. "Aura Airlines Flight 815 to London. No, I'm not on it anymore. They just kicked me off." He listened again, then said the words that would change everything for every single person involved in the last 10 minutes. "They said a woman in first class felt unsafe because I was there. My seat was 1A. Yes, Dad, that's what I said." "Okay, hold on." Jamal looked at the gate agent. "My dad wants to speak to you." Frank rolled his eyes, exasperated. "Sir, I really don't have time to talk to your father." "I think you should," Jamal said, his expression unreadable. "His name is Marcus Hayes." The name meant nothing to Frank. He sighed and took the phone, ready to deliver a practiced professional brush-off. "Hello, Mr. Hayes, this is Frank, the gate supervisor for Aura Airlines. I understand you're upset, but the captain's decision is final." The voice on the other end of the phone was not angry. It was not shouting. It was calm, controlled, and carried an unmistakable weight of immense power. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Frank," the voice said, the sound clear and cold as ice, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. My name is Marcus Hayes. I am the CEO of Stratus Dynamics. I suggest you look up what that company does and who its largest partners are. Now you have 60 seconds to get your station manager, the captain of that flight, and the lead flight attendant back to this gate. And Frank, under no circumstances is the jet bridge to be pulled away from that aircraft. Do you understand me?" Frank's blood ran cold. Stratus Dynamics. It wasn't just any company. They were a global aerospace and logistics behemoth. They designed guidance systems and cargo solutions, and they were one of the largest purchasers of Boeing and Airbus aircraft in the world, leasing them to airline consortiums, including the one that owned Aura Airlines. Frank's hand trembled as he held the phone. He looked at Jamal, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw not a kid in a hoodie, but the son of one of the most powerful men in the aviation industry. "Yes, Mr. Hayes," Frank stammered, his face pale. "Right away, sir." The game had just changed. Marcus Hayes was not a man given to overt displays of emotion. He had built his empire, Stratus Dynamics, on logic, precision, and an almost surgical understanding of leverage. When his son called, his initial reaction was paternal concern. When he heard the words "kicked me off," it turned to anger. But when he heard why, the anger sublimated into something far more dangerous: cold, calculated fury. While Frank the gate agent was scrambling, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple, Marcus was already in motion. His office, a minimalist glass-walled space overlooking the twinkling lights of a city skyline, became a war room. With his son's phone still held to one ear, he was typing with his other hand. An email, short and brutally direct, was fired off to his executive assistant. The subject line, urgent, Aura Airlines, Flight 815. On the tarmac at JFK, Frank was babbling into his radio. I need Station Manager Phillips at Gate C34 immediately. Immediately. And pull Captain Miller and the lead purser from 815. No, I don't care if they've closed the door. Tell them it's a security directive from corporate. Do it now. Inside the plane, Caroline Sterling was sipping her champagne, feeling vindicated. The brief disruption had been worth it. The cabin was now restored to its proper, harmonious state. She adjusted her silk pillow and idly wondered if she should write a commendation for that flight attendant, Brenda. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, but it lacked its earlier confident boom. It was strained. Folks, this is your captain speaking. It appears we have a slight, unexpected issue with some paperwork on the ground. We're going to be holding at the gate for just a few moments longer. We'll get it sorted out and be on our way shortly. A collective groan went through the aircraft. A slight issue was airline code for an indefinite delay. Back at the gate, station manager Sarah Phillips arrived, a formidable woman in a crisp airline blazer, her face a mask of annoyance at being summoned so urgently. Frank, what in God's name is going on? I was in an ops meeting. Frank simply pointed a trembling finger at the phone in his hand. He's on the phone. Marcus Hayes. Sarah's eyes widened. Unlike Frank, she knew that name instantly. Stratus Dynamics was not just a partner. They were a titan. Aura Airlines' parent company had just signed a multi-billion-dollar logistics and technology deal with them 3 months ago, a deal that Marcus Hayes had personally overseen. She took the phone. Mr. Hayes, this is Sarah Phillips, the station manager for Aura here at JFK. I am so terribly sorry for any misunderstanding. Save the apologies, Sarah. Marcus's voice cut through her like a laser. They're worthless to me right now. What is valuable is information. Is my son, Jamal Hayes, standing next to you? Yes, sir, he is. Is the person who identified herself as Caroline Sterling still on your aircraft? I believe so, sir. Are the captain and lead flight attendant who removed my son from their plane on their way to you? Just then, Captain Miller and a very confused Brenda Walsh emerged from the jet bridge, their faces etched with irritation. What is this, Sarah? We're about to miss our takeoff window. Sarah Phillips held up a hand to silence him, her face ashen. Yes, Mr. Hayes, they've just arrived. Excellent, Marcus said. The word sounded like a death sentence. Now I want you to do 3 things. First, you will put my son back on that airplane and escort him to his assigned seat, 1A. You will do this personally. Second, you will have Port Authority officers meet the plane and remove Ms. Caroline Sterling. She can find another way to London. Third, you will inform Captain Miller and Ms. Walsh that they are to remain at the gate. They will not be flying tonight. In fact, they will be meeting with your airline's chief operating officer and my general counsel here at JFK within the next 2 hours. There was a stunned silence. Sarah Phillips looked at Captain Miller, whose jaw had dropped. Removing a passenger was one thing. Grounding the flight crew and summoning executives to the airport in the middle of the night was unheard of. Mr. Hayes, Sarah began, trying to find a foothold of reason. With all due respect, grounding a flight crew and delaying an international departure, that requires a directive from our Central Operations Control. It does, Marcus replied smoothly, and I'm on the phone with your CEO, David Richardson, on my other line right now. I suspect that directive will be coming through in about 3, 2, 1. As if scripted, Sarah's radio crackled to life. The voice was panicked, belonging to the head of operations at the JFK Tower. All units, directive from Executive Command. Aura 815 is grounded. Repeat, Aura Flight 815 is now grounded. Do not move the aircraft. Secure the jet bridge. Await executive instructions. This is not a drill. Captain Miller staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. Brenda Walsh's face crumpled, the color draining from it. Frank, the gate agent, looked like he was about to be sick. The call had been made. The giant had been awoken. An entire Boeing 777 with its 289 passengers and millions of dollars of jet fuel was held hostage on the tarmac at the command of a man who had been disrespected through his son. Marcus's voice came back through the phone, now directed at his son. "Jamal, are you there?" "Yeah, Dad, I'm here. They're going to take care of you now. I'll see you in London. We'll have breakfast." His tone softened for a moment, the father replacing the CEO. "And son, I'm proud of how you handled yourself." He hung up. The silence that followed was heavier than the 400-ton aircraft sitting motionless at the gate. Jamal Hayes stood in the center of the storm, no longer just a boy in a hoodie, but the calm, quiet catalyst for a corporate earthquake. The announcement that Flight 815 was officially grounded pending a security and operational review sent a ripple of chaos through the plane. Phones were immediately switched on, and the cabin buzzed with the frantic energy of canceled meetings and disrupted holiday plans. In first class, the mood was one of entitled indignation. Caroline Sterling was furious. "This is completely unacceptable," she exclaimed to a new younger flight attendant who was trying in vain to placate the cabin. "First that disturbance, and now this? I have a suite booked at the Savoy. I'll have all of your jobs for this." The irony was lost on her. She believed the delay was yet another sign of the world's decaying standards, completely oblivious to the fact that she was the meteorite that had triggered the extinction-level event. Her tirade was interrupted by the sight of station manager Sarah Phillips walking purposefully down the aisle, her face a grim, unreadable mask. She was flanked by two Port Authority police officers. Caroline smiled, assuming they were here to give a formal update and perhaps offer her some bonus miles for her trouble. "Is this about the delay?" Caroline asked condescendingly. "It's about time someone took control." Sarah Phillips stopped next to her seat. "Ms. Caroline Sterling?" "Yes," she replied, expecting an apology. "Ma'am, on behalf of Aura Airlines, I'm going to have to ask you to collect your belongings and come with me. You will be deplanned immediately." The smile vanished from Caroline's face, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. "What? You're kicking me off? Do you have any idea who I am? There must be a mistake. It was the other one, the boy who caused the problem." "There is no mistake, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. The two police officers stood impassively, their presence a silent, non-negotiable punctuation mark. "Please, let's not make this any more of a scene than it already is." But Caroline was incapable of not making a scene. "This is outrageous. I'm a Celestial member. I'll sue. I'll ruin this airline," she shrieked as passengers pulled out their phones, the first glimmers of the story starting to record. Her husband, who had been silent until now, tried to calm her, but it was no use. Her protests were ignored. One of the officers spoke, his voice calm and firm. "Ma'am, you can leave the aircraft under your own power, or we can escort you. The choice is yours." Defeated and incandescent with rage, Caroline Sterling, the self-appointed queen of the first-class cabin, was forced to collect her Birkin bag. She was marched down the same aisle she had sashayed up just an hour before, her face a blotchy, furious red. Every passenger she passed stared, their phones held up, documenting her walk of shame. As she was escorted off the jet bridge, the last thing she saw was Jamal Hayes, standing quietly with the gate agent, waiting to reclaim his seat. The look of utter comprehension and horror that dawned on her face was a sight to behold. Back on the plane, Sarah Phillips's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the delay. We are resolving the situation and will have a further update for you shortly. Thank you for your continued patience." A few minutes later, Jamal Hayes walked back into the first-class cabin. He was escorted by Sarah Phillips herself, who stopped at seat 1A. "Mr. Hayes, your seat. Please accept my most profound apologies on behalf of the entire airline. Can I get you anything at all?" "Just some water, thank you," Jamal said quietly. He sat down, the very picture of calm. But the atmosphere was now electric. The businessman in 3A, who had silently watched the whole thing unfold, leaned forward. "Son, I don't know who you are, but that was the most spectacular corporate takedown I have ever witnessed in my life. Jamal gave a small, weary smile. He put his headphones back on, not to block out the noise, but to find a small pocket of normalcy in a situation that had spiraled into the surreal. Meanwhile, in a sterile, windowless office near the gate, Captain Miller and Brenda Walsh were facing their own reckoning. David Richardson, the CEO of Aura Airlines, was on a large monitor via a video call. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. Next to the monitor stood two men in sharp suits who had appeared as if from nowhere. They introduced themselves as being from the General Counsel's Office of Stratus Dynamics. "Let me be clear," David Richardson said, his voice gravelly with fury. "In the span of 30 minutes, you two have managed to jeopardize one of the most important strategic partnerships this airline has. You have violated a dozen of our own corporate policies on passenger treatment and de-escalation. You racially profiled and illegally removed the son of Marcus Hayes from one of our aircraft." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Captain Miller, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Your flight credentials are to be surrendered. Brenda, your employment with Aura Airlines is terminated. You can collect your personal effects from your locker, and you will be escorted from the premises." Brenda began to sob, a quiet, desperate sound. "But the other passenger, she was so aggressive. I was just trying to prevent a delay." "You failed," Richardson snapped. "You did not de-escalate. You escalated. You did not seek facts. You accepted accusation as fact. You did not protect a passenger. You sided with an aggressor because it was easier. The delay you caused by your actions will cost this airline more than your salary for the next 20 years. Now get out of my sight." Captain Miller, white as a sheet, simply nodded. The authority he wielded with such arrogance just an hour ago was gone, stripped from him in an instant. They were no longer the captain and purser of a flagship international flight. They were just two people who had made the biggest mistake of their careers, and the consequences were only just beginning. While Flight 815 sat dormant, its passengers grumbling, the digital world was exploding. The videos of Caroline Sterling's rant, followed by her humiliating removal from the plane, had hit Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Initially, the clips were without context, just a Karen being kicked off a flight. But soon the passenger from 3A, a tech journalist named Ben Carter, posted a detailed thread of what he had witnessed. He wrote, "On Aura 815 JFK LHR, witnessed a black teen sitting quietly in 1A, get accused of not belonging by a white woman. Crew sided with her, kicked him off. Turns out kid's dad is Marcus Hayes of Stratus Dynamics. Plane is now grounded. Woman ejected, crew suspended. Never seen anything like it." The post went viral. Within an hour, Aura Airlines, Marcus Hayes, and first-class Karen were trending globally. The court of public opinion is swift and merciless, and the verdict was unanimous. Caroline Sterling was the villain. Aura Airlines was incompetent and prejudiced. Jamal Hayes was the calm, dignified victim, and Marcus Hayes was the avenging hero. For Caroline Sterling, the karma was swift and brutal. By the time she had been processed by the Port Authority and released into the sterile, late-night emptiness of JFK's arrivals hall, her world had already been set on fire. Her full name was identified by internet sleuths within minutes. She was a lifestyle influencer whose brand was built on an image of effortless elegance and aspirational wealth. That brand was now toxic waste. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Emails from brands, luxury handbag makers, private jet charter companies, exclusive resorts, all terminating their partnerships. Her comment sections were a raging inferno of condemnation. Her carefully curated image of perfection was shattered, replaced by the blotchy, screeching face from a dozen viral videos. But the real blow came later. Her husband, a hedge fund manager named Todd Sterling, found that his business was built on a similar foundation of perception and trust. When his phone started blowing up with calls from panicked investors pulling their money, he realized the damage was not just social, but financial. The scandal surrounding his wife was a character stain he couldn't afford. The public humiliation was the appetizer. Financial ruin would be the main course. For Brenda Walsh, the consequences were more personal and tragic. Escorted out of the airport like a common criminal, she sat in her car in the employee parking lot, the termination letter on the passenger seat. 32 years of service, of building a career, of earning the coveted senior purser position, all gone in a single catastrophic error of judgment. She wasn't an evil person. She was a tired, overworked employee who had taken a shortcut, who had succumbed to the pressure of a demanding passenger and her own unconscious bias. But in the unforgiving calculus of the modern world, her intentions didn't matter. Only her actions and their spectacular fallout did. She would be blacklisted, a pariah in the industry she had dedicated her life to. Captain Robert Miller faced a different kind of professional death. His suspension was just the beginning. The FAA would launch its own investigation into his decision to remove a passenger without sufficient cause. His sterling record was permanently tarnished. He would never again captain a flagship international route. He, a man defined by his command, had lost control in the most critical moment, not due to a mechanical failure or a storm, but a failure of character. His authority was an illusion, propped up by a uniform and a title, and it had crumbled at the first real test. Back on the plane, a new flight crew, summoned from a nearby hotel, was boarding. A new captain, a woman in her 40s with a calm and reassuring demeanor, introduced herself over the intercom, apologized sincerely, and announced they had been cleared for takeoff. The flight was 3 hours delayed, but it was finally leaving. As the Boeing 777 finally pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, Jamal watched the lights of the terminal recede. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't asked for a war to be fought on his behalf. He just wanted to go to London. But the world, it seemed, had other plans. He felt a profound sense of melancholy. There was no joy in seeing people's lives ruined, but there was a grim satisfaction in seeing a system, however briefly, bend toward justice. The price of prejudice, he now knew, was steeper than anyone on that plane could have ever imagined. The ripples from this single event would continue to spread, washing over boardrooms, training manuals, and corporate policies for years to come. And it all started because a woman in seat 2B couldn't imagine a boy in seat 1A belonged there. 3 days later, in the London headquarters of Aura Airlines' parent company, the Global Aviation Group, Jagedi, the fallout was still settling. The emergency board meeting was tense. The stock had taken a 6% dip, a paper loss of over $800 million, directly attributable to the JFK incident. The PR department was working around the clock, but they were trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. David Richardson, Aura's CEO, stood before the board, looking haggard. "The damage is significant," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "Brand trust is at an all-time low. We are the poster child for corporate racial bias." An elderly board member, Sir Alan Carmichael, peered over his glasses. "What about Hayes? What does he want?" "That," Richardson said, "is the billion-dollar question." Marcus Hayes had been silent for 2 days. He hadn't sued. He hadn't released a public statement. This silence was, in many ways, more terrifying than any lawsuit. It meant he was thinking, planning. It meant he was deciding their fate. The call came that afternoon. Marcus Hayes requested a meeting, not with lawyers, but with David Richardson and the entire gag board. He would be bringing Jamal. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a private suite at the Corinthia Hotel. The air was thick with tension. The board members, titans of industry used to controlling every room they entered, were deferential, nervous. Marcus and Jamal Hayes entered. Marcus wore a perfectly tailored suit, a stark contrast to Jamal's simple dark sweater and slacks. Jamal looked uncomfortable but resolute. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and even, "my son was racially profiled, humiliated, and illegally removed from your aircraft. Your crew, from the captain down, failed at every conceivable level. Your system failed. This is not about one rude passenger or 2 incompetent employees. This is about a corporate culture that allowed this to happen." He let that sink in. "I have not filed a lawsuit. I am not interested in a financial settlement. Taking your money is easy, and frankly, it's meaningless. It doesn't fix the problem." He gestured to Jamal. "My son is 17. He is one of the brightest young minds I know. He wants to build the next generation of aircraft that your airlines will fly. And on Monday night, you taught him that no matter how brilliant he is, no matter how much he achieves, some people will only ever see the color of his skin. You taught him that his presence in a space he earned and paid for is conditional. Jamal spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but clear. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even that angry at first. I was just disappointed. The flight attendant, the captain, they didn't even try to listen. They just saw what they expected to see. Marcus took over again. So, this is what we are going to do. This is not a negotiation. He slid a folder across the polished mahogany table. First, you are going to issue a formal public apology, not a vague corporate statement about not meeting your standards, but a real one. It will name my son, and it will use the words racial bias. Second, you are going to fire your current third-party diversity and inclusion training firm, which is clearly a check-the-box waste of money. You will replace them with the O'Connell Institute, the best in the field. You will implement their top-to-bottom training program for all employees, from baggage handlers to the boardroom. Stratus Dynamics will subsidize the first year of the contract to ensure it gets done. Third, you are going to create a scholarship fund, the Jamal Hayes Next Generation Aviators Grant. It will provide a full-ride scholarship and pilot training for 10 underprivileged minority students every year, in perpetuity. My family foundation will match every dollar you put in. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with each board member. You have an opportunity here. You can be the airline that became a cautionary tale, or you can be the airline that learned from its catastrophic mistake and led the entire industry in making a genuine change. The choice is yours. He stood up. You have 24 hours to announce your acceptance of these terms. If you do not, the Stratus Dynamics logistics contract will be terminated for breach of partner ethics clause, and my lawyers, who are far less pleasant than I am, will proceed with litigation that will make your current stock dip look like a minor tremor. With that, he and Jamal turned and walked out, leaving the folder in a room full of stunned, silent executives behind them. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reconstruction. Marcus Hayes wasn't just grounding a plane. He was charting a new flight path for an entire industry, using his immense power not just to punish, but to build something better from the wreckage. The aftermath of the meeting was as swift as the grounding of Flight 815. The Global Aviation Group Board, faced with a choice between public redemption and corporate suicide, unanimously accepted Marcus Hayes' terms. The next day, a press conference was held. David Richardson, looking humbled, stood before a sea of cameras and delivered the most direct and candid apology in modern aviation history. He named Jamal Hayes, detailed the failures of his crew, and explicitly called the incident a result of unacceptable racial bias. He then announced the 3 initiatives Marcus had laid out: the new training partnership with the O'Connell Institute, the establishment of the scholarship fund, and a renewed commitment to systemic change. The story transformed overnight. Aura Airlines, once the villain, was now embarking on a public and very expensive journey of atonement. Their stock price began to recover. Marcus Hayes was lauded not as a vengeful billionaire, but as a strategic activist who had used his leverage for social good. Jamal found himself an unwilling celebrity. He was praised for his composure and dignity. He did one interview with a respected journalist where he spoke not about the anger, but about his passion for aviation. He talked about engine schematics and fuselage stress tolerances. He ended the interview by saying, "I hope that when people hear my name, they eventually think of a new type of hybrid electric engine, not just a seat on an airplane." Life eventually returned to a new kind of normal. Caroline Sterling disappeared from public life. Her social media was deleted. Her website went dark. A brief news item a year later noted that her husband's hedge fund had been dissolved, and they had sold their Hamptons estate. She became a ghost, a cautionary meme, the permanent digital face of entitled prejudice. Brenda Walsh wrote a blog post that went semi-viral. In it, she didn't make excuses, but tried to explain the pressures of her job, the constant fear of passenger complaints, and the split-second decision that ruined her life. It was a sad, humanizing account, but it didn't get her job back. She ended up working in retail, a shadow of the proud professional she once was. Captain Robert Miller retired early. The FAA investigation concluded he had abused his authority. He moved to a small town in Florida, his career ending not with a grand farewell, but with a quiet, shameful fizzle. A year later, Jamal was a freshman at MIT, majoring in aerospace engineering. One afternoon, he received a package. Inside was a letter and a framed photo. The photo was of 10 smiling teenagers, 7 black, 2 Hispanic, 1 Native American, standing in front of a small Cessna. They were the inaugural class of the Jamal Hayes Next Generation Aviators Grant. The letter was handwritten from a young woman named Maria. She wrote that she had grown up in a poor neighborhood in Chicago, dreaming of planes she only saw from the ground. She had never believed she would ever get to fly one. "Because of what happened to you," she wrote, "and because of what you and your father did about it, my dream is coming true. We all promise to make you proud." Jamal pinned the photo above his desk, next to his complex diagrams and blueprints. The incident on Flight 815 had been ugly and humiliating. It had exposed a deep-seated prejudice that he knew still existed. But as he looked at the faces of those 10 future pilots, he understood the profound alchemy of the event. A moment of injustice had been transformed. An act of exclusion had, through a stunning display of power and purpose, created a new pathway to inclusion. His seat, 1A, had been far more than just a comfortable chair with a view. It had become a fulcrum, a point on which an entire industry was forced to pivot, ever so slightly, toward a better, more just horizon. 18 months had passed. The news cycle, with its ravenous and fleeting appetite, had long since moved on from the JFK incident. For the public, the story of Aura Airlines Flight 815 was a closed loop, a dramatic injustice met with decisive, satisfying justice. The airline had apologized, the culprits were punished, and a progressive new path was forged. But inside the vast, complex machinery of the airline itself, the ghost of that night still haunted the hallways, the cockpits, and the crew lounges. The changes Marcus Hayes had mandated from on high were not a gentle course correction. They were a shock to the system, and the system was beginning to show signs of rejection. The O'Connell Institute's diversity program, which had been a key pillar of the settlement, was now known derisively among the staff as the Hayes Mandates. It was an exhaustive, data-driven, and relentlessly rigorous training regimen. Every employee, from the executive suite to the tarmac ground crew, had to complete quarterly interactive modules, attend mandatory seminars, and submit to implicit bias audits. Failure to comply with perfect scores meant being grounded or put on administrative leave. The intent was noble. The execution, however, felt punitive. Instead of fostering understanding, it bred resentment. Employees felt that they were all being collectively punished for the sins of Brenda Walsh and Robert Miller. A simmering discontent brewed, particularly among the veteran pilots and flight crews, who felt their professional judgment was being replaced by a rigid, fear-based flowchart. They weren't being trained to be better. They were being trained to avoid lawsuits. Captain Eva Rostova was one of these veterans. A top pilot with a flawless 25-year record, she had mentored dozens of first officers and was universally respected for her calm demeanor under pressure. She found the new culture suffocating. She was in the pilot's lounge at Chicago O'Hare, sipping burnt coffee and listening to 2 younger first officers complain about their latest O'Connell module. "It's a joke," one said. The scenario was a passenger from a specific demographic refusing to put their bag in the overhead. Every correct answer was just a different flavor of groveling apology. The incorrect answer? Firmly stating it's a federal aviation regulation. How does that help with safety? "It's not about safety anymore," Rostova said, her voice low and steady, drawing their attention. "It's about liability. We are no longer trained to be the ultimate authority on that aircraft. We are trained to be customer service representatives who can mitigate brand risk." She had respected Captain Miller, not for his final disastrous decision, but for his decades of service. She, like many others, felt he and Brenda had been thrown to the wolves. They had made a terrible mistake, yes, but the corporate response felt less like a correction and more like a human sacrifice to appease a powerful client. The story that the public never heard was of the deep-seated fear that now permeated the crew. Fear of making the wrong call, fear of a passenger with a smartphone, fear of becoming the next cautionary tale. This fear had its own unintended consequences. 2 weeks prior, on a flight from Dallas to San Francisco, a first-class passenger had become belligerent after being refused a fourth scotch. The passenger was a man of color, loud and aggressive, and the junior flight attendant was terrified. The O'Connell training had drilled into her the potential repercussions of confronting a minority passenger. She hesitated, trying to de-escalate with soft, non-confrontational language. The man's aggression only grew, culminating in him shoving another passenger. By the time security was called, the situation had spun out of control, causing a formal safety violation to be logged. The old rules would have had him cut off and warned sternly at the first sign of trouble. The new rules, filtered through a lens of fear, had allowed the problem to fester. This incident, and others like it, were making their way up the chain to CEO David Richardson. He was a man trapped. The Hayes mandates had saved the company's public image and its stock price. The scholarship program was a PR triumph, but operationally his airline was suffering from a crisis of morale and confidence. The pilots' union had filed a formal grievance, stating that the new D&I protocols were interfering with federal regulations concerning crew authority and aircraft safety. Richardson was on a video call with Marcus Hayes. It was their semi-annual progress check-in, part of the agreement. "The numbers on the scholarship program are fantastic, Marcus," Richardson said, trying to keep the mood positive. "We have some truly exceptional candidates in the pipeline." "That's good to hear, David," Marcus replied, his face impassive on the screen. "And the internal compliance metrics?" Richardson hesitated. "They're 100% as required. But I'll be candid, the implementation is causing friction. Morale is at an all-time low. My crews feel like they're walking on eggshells. We're seeing a measurable increase in in-flight incident reports because flight attendants are hesitating to enforce rules for fear of being accused of bias." Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Are you suggesting we roll back the training?" "No, of course not," Richardson said quickly. "But we need to find a balance. The pendulum has swung from a place of dangerous complacency to a place of paralyzing fear. My people are so afraid of repeating Bob Miller's mistake that they are creating new, different mistakes." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Marcus's mind. He had approached the problem as an engineer. Identify the flaw, remove it, and replace it with a superior system. But a corporation wasn't a jet engine. It was a complex organic ecosystem of thousands of human beings, with their own fears, loyalties, and resentments. He had forced a change in their behavior, but he hadn't, and perhaps couldn't, change their hearts. His solution, born of a father's righteous anger, had been precise and powerful, but perhaps it lacked a crucial understanding of the human element. He thought of Jamal, thriving at MIT, already co-authoring a paper on composite materials. The world saw his son as a symbol of grace under pressure, but Marcus knew the incident had left a fine, invisible scar. Jamal had become more withdrawn, more wary of strangers. The price of that lesson was still being paid. And now it seemed the entire airline was paying it too, in ways neither he nor David Richardson had ever anticipated. The ghost of Flight 815 was no longer just a memory. It had become a virus in the airline's operating system, and it was beginning to corrupt everything. That single tense moment in the first-class cabin of Aura 815 wasn't just about one teenager and one entitled passenger. It became a powerful story about how quickly prejudice can surface, even in the most privileged of settings, and the extraordinary lengths required to hold it accountable. We saw how the system failed Jamal Hayes, from the flight attendant to the captain, but then we saw how a different kind of system, one of immense power, principle, and strategic thinking, was used not just for revenge, but for reform. It's a stark reminder that true justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about rewriting the rules so the game itself becomes fairer for everyone who follows. This wasn't just karma, it was a forced evolution, paid for with one family's dignity and leveraged into an opportunity for thousands. What would you have done in Jamal's situation? Or the flight attendants? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe for more incredible real-life stories of drama, justice, and the consequences of our actions.